Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today. Welcome to Professional Licensure, Moving Beyond Minimal Compliance. I just wanted to let you know that this presentation is being recorded and the resources will be available on our MHEC website after the event, and that includes the recording. Please submit questions in the Q&A. And we have a survey coming to you after the webinar for you to complete as well. Next slide, please. So again, good afternoon. My name is Sarah Appel, and I am the director of SARA here at MHEC. And I am happy to have with us today Kris Maul and Nan Kalke. Kris, I'll let you take it away.
Great. Thanks so much, Sarah. Very happy to be here today and be presenting for this webinar for MHEC. We appreciate working with MHEC throughout the past year or so on different license-related topics. So thank you everyone for being here today. My name is Kris Maul, and I have over 14, almost 15 years of experience working on professional licensure issues in higher education. Most of that time was spent working for Capella University in their legal team, managing a small team of professionals who focused on licensure and compliance issues related to that for the institution. Just about 2 years ago, Nan and myself joined forces and started Higher Education Licensure Pros. And we are a consulting firm that works with colleges and universities of all types and sizes on professional licensure related issues. I'm going to let Nan introduce herself here briefly.
Thanks, Kris, and hi, everyone. Yes, Kris and I first met when I worked also at Capella University. I worked there from 2010 to 2020, first as an accreditation specialist, working across schools to help them gain specialized accreditation, and then in the School of Counseling, providing program and operational support to help them maintain quality assurance standards. Prior to Capella, I worked at the University of Minnesota in the School of Social Work. I directed their MSW distance education program and managed statewide training programs in child welfare and foster care. I also hold a PhD from the University of Minnesota. In the last 2 years, maybe not quite, I've been learning to be an expert in licensure research, and I'm happy to be doing that with Kris. Back to you, Kris, to talk about our agenda.
Great. So this is our plan for the next almost hour together that we have today. First, I'm going to start with a brief review of the current federal and SARA requirements related to professional licensure disclosures. And then in addition to that, we'll be going over some policy and process considerations for your institution related to this work. Some of the challenges and opportunities that we see institutions experiencing when trying to engage in this important compliance effort. And then most of our time, hopefully, we'll get to those proposed federal regulations and SARA policy changes that are on the docket. So to make sure that everyone's aware of what could be coming up here in the near future in 2023. And finally, there are some additional resources and support available through MHEC and MSARA, and we will highlight what those are for you all at the end of our time today. As Sarah mentioned, please do submit your questions through the Q&A, and we will be sure to handle those either as they come in through the presentation or definitely at the end. We have some time reserved for that today. So first, that brief review of the current requirements under Federal Title IV regulation and SARA policy. So I'm sure most of you on the line today are familiar with this, but just as a review, since July 1st of 2020, the Title IV regulations and SARA policy have required that institutions do two things in relation to professional and occupational licensure. And the first is that institutions must understand how their programs related to a license meet or do not meet the educational requirements in every US state and territory. And there are 59 of those outlined in the federal regulation. In addition to understanding that, institutions must communicate that at specific times and to specific audiences per the federal regulation. So a little more about both of those responsibilities. First, the understanding piece. So again, this is for any program, whether that's a degree program or certificate program that your institution offers that your students can utilize Title IV funds to participate in that's related to a professional license. So anything that's been designed to lead to a license in a specific profession or occupation, or anything that's being advertised as leading to or resulting in that license. Those are the types of programs that fall under this regulation. And this does apply to all modes of delivery. So sometimes people think that, this is really a distance education requirement. That's not true. This applies across the board to all modes of delivery, whether it is a distance program or on a physical campus in person or some hybrid of the two. So I mentioned, the responsibility is to understand how your program meets or does not meet the educational requirements. There's this third kind of category that's outlined in the federal regulation, and there's been no determination made for a state or territory. And I would say, in our experience, 85 to 90% of institutions are relying on this no determination statement right now. So someone at your institution, maybe it was you or a colleague, put together, licensure information, disclosures. It's up on your website somewhere, and it says no determination made for almost all of the states and territories, maybe except for the one where you're located and maybe some neighboring states. But otherwise, this no determination is being used and relied upon very heavily right now. So a couple things to note about that. Under SARA policy, there is language that indicates an institution must make all reasonable efforts to determine if their program meets or doesn't meet before relying on this no determination statement. And another thing to point out is that during the original negotiated rulemaking, when this regulation was being discussed and ultimately then drafted, there were several negotiators who indicated this no determination is important while institutions engage in the research to understand the licensing requirements and compare their programs to them, but it's not something that should be used forever. So just keep that in mind, and we'll be touching on the no determination piece throughout the next hour together here. So in addition to understanding, as I mentioned, the other primary responsibility is that institutions communicate how their programs meet or do not meet those educational requirements across all US states and territories. And the first way to do this is through a public disclosure. And these are typically done on an institution's website, although they can be done in any written format. And I'm going to pause. I see Sarah's got a hand raised there. Go ahead, Sarah.
Sure. We had a question. Is there a distinction made between licensure and certification? My field is board certified. Only certain states are also require licensure. Does this distinction matter for these guidelines?
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. Yes, that distinction does matter. So one challenge when talking about these specific requirements, usually we're using the term licensure because that's the language that is used in the federal regulation and in the SARA policy. But certification also comes into play because some states title their authority to practice as certification. So teaching is a common area where you'll see this. A lot of states call it teacher certification rather than a teacher license. So the bottom line is that any type of state or territory issued thing, whatever they call that thing, whether it's a license or an endorsement or a certificate or a certification, whatever that thing is, it's issued by that state or territory, by the government itself. That's what we're talking about for these disclosures. So if it's a board, like a private board issued certification, or an agency or nonprofit organization that's issuing some kind of professional certification, those do not fit within this framework. Those are not part of the federal regulation or SARA policy. So we're only talking about the government issued credential, whatever that is, that provides someone with the authority to practice as that professional in that field, in that state or territory. So great question. I'm going to keep rolling here, but please, again, submit your questions as you have them. So for public disclosures, again, can be on a website or any written format that's available to the public and prospective students in particular. Again, it does need to cover all US states and territories. There are 59 of those per the federal regulation. And under SARA policy, if you're using that no determination or not determined language for a state or territory, you do need to provide the contact information for that state or territory licensing board or agency, and then encourage people to contact that board to try to determine how the program meets the requirements or not. In addition to the public disclosures, there are individual direct disclosures that are required. And these are typically done through email, but again, can be in any written format that you make available to prospective students and students. Direct disclosures are connected to the student or prospective student's location. And location is something that each institution gets to define for themselves. In other words, it's not defined within the federal regulation or SARA policy. So I have a slide here coming up shortly on student location policy. So I'm not going to say too much more about that at this moment, but just know that the student location policy your institution has in place or you craft is going to be key for these direct disclosures. Go ahead, Sarah.
So somebody brought up one of my favorite topics, SIP codes. Are schools relying on no determination because the SIP code, the SOC crosswalk that allows for the licenses search state is unreliable, such as that tononline.org crosswalk with the CIP code?
Yeah, so that is a great, interesting question, which we have heard institutions ask before. You know, where do SIP codes fit into all this? So I will say in general, as most of you probably know better than I do, you know, SIP codes aren't perfect. They're not aligned perfectly with various professions, with your program, and it's often hard to find that exact match, right, within SIP codes. And the reality is that SIP codes don't play a part in this federal regulation itself. So I think that it can be a useful tool when you're going through the list of programs that your institution offers, to use SIP codes as kind of one mechanism to evaluate, you know, is this a licensure program or not? But the SIP codes in and of themselves are not the be all end all here, because it's important, again, to know how have we designed this particular degree or certificate program? You know, what are the learning outcomes associated with it? Are we aligned to any kind of external standards, such as, you know, specialized accreditation, other factors that would come into play? And also, how are we advertising it? So if there's language out there on your website or in your catalog or about marketing materials where there are claims being made about particular types of jobs that are available by completing this program, you know, you have to look really closely at that. Are those jobs or positions ones that do require a professional or occupational license? And if the answer is yes, then that fits in with the category of a licensure program, even though, you know, the SIP codes themselves may not be perfectly aligned to a profession that typically requires a license. All right, so I'm going to move back to these direct disclosures then. Student location is key. We'll get to more of that in a moment. Just a little bit on timing. So with these direct disclosures, you do need to send them to all prospective students that are located in a no determination made or a does not meet state or territory. So again, we know that many of you probably have no determination made for a large number of states and territories for your programs now. Just keep in mind that that means you should be sending out these individual direct disclosure emails to all prospective students located in those states and territories. One other piece about direct disclosures, and this is for current students, if you change a categorization for a state or territory to a does not meet status, so if something changes about your curriculum, or if something changes with the state's requirements and it becomes a does not meet location, then you have 14 calendar days to send a direct disclosure email out to all students located in that state or territory. This could also come into play when your student changes location. So I'm going to shift gears now and talk a little more about the student location piece here in a moment. But first, before we move on from those requirements, what's required today, I wanted to point out some fairly new news that came out from the Department of Veterans Affairs just last month. And technically, this is effective as of last week, 2 weeks ago, February 17th. So there's a rule that Veterans Affairs created in line with some legislation that passed a couple of years ago. And this puts some additional requirements on institutions that are allowing students to utilize GI Bill or other VA educational benefits to enroll in your programs. So these requirements around licensure go above and beyond what the current Title IV regulation and the SARA policy require of institutions. So the first here is this new VA rule indicates that any program you're offering, again, where students can utilize that GI Bill or other educational benefit, that you must ensure or you must meet all instructional curriculum licensure requirements. So I almost said the word ensure because we're going to see that here shortly under the federal Department of Education proposed language. The VA does not say the word ensure, but they do say that an institution must meet all instructional curriculum licensure requirements in order to offer that program using the VA educational benefits. In addition, there are some additional pieces of information that must be disclosed related to licensure. So you can see the language here. I just pulled that directly from the rule itself in italics. But essentially, in addition to those educational requirements, institutions now need to disclose any additional training, experience, or examination that's required in order to obtain a license or certification. So again, this is focused on that state issued credential, whatever that is, but there usually are several different additional things needed, right? It's not just completing a degree program or certificate program. People that are applying for a license have to have some kind of examination that they're passing, usually one or more. There's often some kind of work experience or after you graduate from a program, a period of time where you have to be supervised when you're practicing in the field. And all of those things do need to now be disclosed under this new VA rule that came out. It is not clear yet if the VA's expectation is for institutions to provide these additional disclosures only for the state where you're approved. So, you know, your SAA, whatever state that is, it's approving you, if you only need to craft these disclosures for that particular state or territory, or if it's going to apply in a more broad sense for, you know, distance education programs in particular. So if it's going to be connected to a student's location, for example, or if it's going to be connected to the location of your main campus or wherever you're getting that state authorizing agency approval from.
Okay, Kris, we have a really good question related to student service members and veterans. It is VA disclosure done at what level prospects are enrolled students?
That is a great question. So I would say that is also not entirely clear from the regulation itself. So one thing I would encourage all of you to do that are listening to this today is to reach out to your SAA with questions like this, because there's not a lot of detail in the implementation of it. It really is just focused on, you know, here are these new additional requirements. You must meet all curriculum, licensure requirements, and here are these additional disclosures related to licensure. So hopefully things will become much more clear in the near future on these things so that all of you can, you know, implement these at your institution. But I do encourage you to reach out to your SAA. And also just wanted to mention, I know many of you may be members of the SAM network, the State Authorization Network, through WCET and WICHE. If you are, I know that Cheryl Dowd has been communicating with folks at Department of Veterans Affairs to try to get more clarity on this. And I think she's going to be hosting a Q&A session in the next couple of weeks. So stay tuned for that as well. Okay, I think that's all I'll say about this new VA requirement at this point. And I'm going to move on to some policy considerations. So I went over a summary of the current requirements. how do you actually go about crafting policy for your institution to support these requirements and make sure you're in compliance? So I have a couple of things to consider as you're doing this. First is, think about how often your disclosures, those public disclosures and direct individual disclosures, are going to be updated. So there's no specific time frame referenced in this particular Title IV regulation, but we do know with other types of Title IV student disclosures that those are done on an annual basis. So our recommendation from HELP is that an institution does at least an annual review and update of these public disclosures, and again, the information going into your direct disclosures. It probably would be helpful to pinpoint a specific month or quarter or time frame that you're going to do this, because again, that 14 calendar day window comes into play for any current student. So if you're going through and updating some of your disclosures and there's been a change, and now all of a sudden you have some additional states that are in that does not meet status, reminder that you'll have 14 calendar days to send out that direct disclosure email to those groups of students. Another thing to consider here is for many of these states or territories, you will need to have someone that's very familiar with the details of the curriculum, comparing your program's curriculum to a specific set of requirements from a state or territory. So many of these license types have long lists of coursework that they want to see on each applicant's transcript when they're applying for a license. And in those scenarios, you will need someone at your institution who's familiar with the curriculum to review that long list of courses and compare it to what's offered or available through your program before you could make that determination if your program meets or not. Another policy consideration is, when exactly are we going to send those direct disclosures to our prospective students? So again, there's a little bit of flexibility here because there's not a clearly defined moment in the federal regulation itself, but essentially it needs to occur before enrollment. So if you already have a policy in place at your institution where you're defining what enrollment means, when that actually happens, you would want to make sure it's connected to these direct disclosures. If you don't have such a policy, you may want to create one that's defining when enrollment happens so that you can be very clear about that and when these disclosures will go out. And really, financial commitment is a consideration that most institutions are using. So definitely before someone has made a financial commitment to the institution, make sure that you've got the direct disclosure sent out to those not determined and does not meet state and territory students, prospective students. Okay, I mentioned location policy earlier, and again, this is really key for those direct disclosures. Every institution needs to have a written policy that establishes the location for prospective students and students. That is the requirement under the federal regulation. Again, it's not prescriptive, so each institution gets to determine how they're going to evaluate and decide student location. Like any policy, you should regularly review this and update it as needed. And I have some considerations here on this slide for you all to think about when you're creating your policy or updating something that you may have put into place quickly, a couple of years ago when this requirement first came out. So, how are students going to notify you of a change in their location? There should be some mechanism for that relocation of a student when they're enrolled in the program. How are you going to be able to collect that information and make sure that then they're categorized in that new location appropriately for direct notification purposes? Similarly, how or when can you confirm the location of students? So some institutions we've worked with in the past couple of years, have instituted a checkpoint. Whenever students are enrolling in courses, they have something within that process now to confirm the location of students for the purposes of these disclosures. There may be other kind of automated things that are going out to your student body on an annual or regular basis, surveys, something like that. Can you incorporate some questions around the student location so that you can make sure that's being updated? Something else to keep in mind when crafting or reviewing your location policy is the connection to SARA, State Authorization Reciprocity Agreement consideration. So I'm sure most of you on the call today are very familiar with SARA's requirements around student location in order to participate in SARA. So, keep that in mind as you're crafting your student location policy for licensure disclosure purposes. One recommendation that's been put out there from some folks at SARA and others is to consider asking your prospective students where they intend to actually work as a licensed professional after they graduate, and send a disclosure for that location, probably in addition to where they're currently located per your policy. So this would be something above and beyond the minimum requirements of the federal regulation, but definitely would get that information about licensure into the hands of prospective students and students for where they're actually planning to work in that field after they graduate. And it's always a great idea to include your general counsel, whether that's someone that is part of your university or outside counsel that your institution engages with, just to make sure you're considering all risks associated with this particular policy and all of the kind of downstream effects that it can have on other policies. Sarah, go ahead. We have a question. Oh, yeah, I think you're on.
There we go. We have a couple
Thanks.
questions related here to location. One of them is, at my institution, 95% of our students are from a 4-state region. We have completed a review of all the licensed professions for which we offer programs in this 4-state region. My institution has chosen to only review requirements in states outside of that 4-state region once we have a prospective student in that location. Is this what many other institutions are also doing?
That's a great question. And I'll say, I don't feel like I have a broad enough sample to generalize, how many other institutions may be taking this approach. But what I will say for this question is that I'm not sure that is in line with the current public disclosure requirement that's out there under federal regulation. So again, it's kind of two separate things we have going on. We have the student location, which is connected to the direct disclosures. And separately, we have the public disclosures, which has no connection to student location in the regulation. And again, that regulation for public disclosures says you must understand and communicate if your program meets or does not meet the educational requirements for all 59 US states and territories. So I know that logically may not make sense for your institution if you only have students coming from these 4 particular states, but nonetheless, that is the current federal requirement, which SARA policy reinforces the federal requirement there too. So,
and just one more, Kris. This person says, I've seen some institutions listing the licensing agency name and contact information for particular programs for each state and territory. Does that meet the requirement of disclosure for professional licensure?
Only listing the contact information by itself does not meet the requirement under federal regulation or SARA policy. It is important to include that information, again, if it's a not determined or have not made a determination state. Under SARA policy, you should be including a link to that border agency website and their contact information and directing prospective students and students to contact the board. But only providing the link does not satisfy the current requirements under federal Title IV regulation or SARA policy.
Thank you, Kris.
Sure, no problem. Thanks for the great questions, everyone. I do have some examples here of location policy, and these are examples that institutions are using, all from the Midwest, actually. I've got 3 policies here. And I put these up just to show that, again, it's up to each institution to determine what your student location policy looks like. And so these 3 examples provide kind of the variety of lenses and approaches that institutions have taken to this. So the first one, this particular university is defining student location as the permanent mailing address. So you can see the language there. They've also chosen to include a definition for time of enrollment. So they're being very clear about this is when someone's considered enrolled, and we will be sending that direct disclosure before that point in time. The second example on the screen, I'd say may be considered kind of the opposite potentially, depending on the scenario. But this example, the university is indicating that a student's location is the place of residence where you would most likely find the student while they're enrolled in the program. So, where they're putting their head down at night. In many scenarios, this could be more of a temporary address or that on-campus address for a student versus a permanent mailing address, which may be their parents' home location or their family's home location. So again, depends on the institution. Your student population best, where you are, where your programs are, if they're online or distance ed or just on campus. All of those things should be factored in when you're thinking about your location policy. And I have one third example here that in a way combines the two previous examples. So this institution is saying that for a prospective student, the student is located in the state of residency at the time they apply for admission. And for current students, it's the state where that currently enrolled student resides and their permanent home address for when they are enrolled. So again, very different ways that this is being defined. All of these policies satisfy the current federal regulation as far as a student location policy for disclosure purposes. Okay, I'm going to hand it over to Nan now to talk to us a little bit more about the actual process of doing this work. So what does it take to be able to make those determinations if your program meets or does not meet, and then communicate that out to your prospective students and students?
Thank you, Kris. But can I throw it back to you? We have a few questions before we move from policy into process. So Sarah, I'm just going to go ahead and read a few of these. Heidi asks the right question to be thinking about in regard to back to individual direct disclosure notifications. Has there, where did I just lost it? Is there a specific office that you recommend that's sending the individual direct disclosure notification for record keeping purposes? Registrar or academic affairs or licensure program?
Yeah, great consideration. Really thinking about how are we going to implement this. I would say the actual office itself or who is sending the email doesn't matter as much as keeping some kind of record that it was sent, right? So you may have some kind of enrollment or admission process in place where it makes sense for something to come from the registrar, or it might make more sense to come from the dean of the school because they're already sending other information about the program and you can integrate the licensure disclosure into that. So not necessarily who's sending it, but just that it is important to keep a record attached to that individual prospective student or student's record that it was sent. And ideally, if you can implement some sort of notification of receipt by the prospective student or student, so maybe you can integrate that into some sort of enrollment agreement that's signed by that applicant, something where it would be an acknowledgement that, yes, I did receive the licensure information. That's a fantastic step in a process if you're able to implement that.
Okay, next one. I know, Kris, you've worked with programs that around giving direct disclosure information to veterans. But what happens if a veteran is stationed at a foreign base or their location is not known?
Yes, this is a great question. And again, there's no clear guidance in current federal regulation around this. I would say if you can incorporate some of this into your student location policy, that's going to be good for you and for the prospective students, just to be clear on how you're going to handle the scenario. But ideally, you would attach them to some US state or territory. So maybe they do have a last known US address, or that maybe they can give you an address of, a family member or something so that they fit within your student location policy. If there truly is no US address, so if it's a scenario where you're enrolling even, folks from outside of the US, then obviously you can't send them a disclosure related to a non-US state, related to another country. You're not going to have that information. And again, just a reminder that this is for purposes of Title IV compliance. So if it's a student who would not be accessing Title IV funds, then it really doesn't fit within these regulations anyway.
Great. One more. If you've searched and looked but cannot make a determination for a specific location, say Guam, is it acceptable to put unknown at this time with the direct link?
Yeah, so the territories are definitely a challenge, and Nan and I have experienced this. We've researched over 50 different license types over the past couple of years, and there are many instances where you just cannot find the information for the territories. So that's what we do in those instances. Whatever we can find, right? If there is a link to, here's a board that would regulate this profession, provide the link and just the information of, we've not been able to determine if there's a license available in the state. So provide as much as you can. And that way you are truly making all reasonable efforts. You've gone out, you've done the research, and you're providing what you can. And sometimes that means you can't provide an answer if it meets or does not meet. And Sarah, I think you had one too.
Yeah, just as a reminder for folks who are working with military connected students and veterans, if you have a question, please reach out to your school's certifying official. They know a lot of the background and a lot of the details for these kinds of questions. So please, make friends with them and, just kind of start a relationship with them, because it can really, really help you out with some of these quite quickly.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. And that'll be even more important, right? Looking ahead to these new VA licensure related regulations, having that good working relationship with others at your institution that are supporting your military affiliated learners will be very important. All right, so I think we're ready to move on to this process piece. So I'm going to hand it back over to Nan.
Thanks, Kris. And please keep posting questions. We will have time. We will for sure leave time to answer questions at the end. And on that note, I'm going to go through what work is required pretty quickly. So in order to understand and communicate, as Kris referenced earlier, that we like to think about student disclosure rules in this way, institutions must first research educational requirements. The first step in this process is a close review of the relevant statutes and administrative regulations that provide definition and procedure for creation of the state board or agency that issues the license or certificate, and also sets qualifications the applicant must meet. So qualifications that you'll find in statute and regulations may include university requirements like a regional or national accreditation, program requirements such as specialized accreditation or residency requirements, and then quite a few applicant requirements: minimum age, criminal background check, some of them require references, and then around educational requirements specifically, whether or not a degree is required, at what level, and sometimes specific fields, required coursework, supervised experience, both within the program and post-graduation, exams, and whether or not the applicant needs to continue to be certified. Second, a review of the publicly available information on the state or territory board or agency's website. You'll want to look at application forms, and many are moving to online at this point, so sometimes you can't see the application form in hard copy unless you're an applicant and you have to log on. That's problematic, but sometimes boards do put up application instructions. You want to review those. FAQs are very helpful to see how they implement what's in statute and regulation. Practice and legislation news, a tab on resources where they may have a link to or copy of relevant statutes and regulations right there, a link to the professional association, and contact information. You will want to double check information you have researched, we do, with a reliable third-party source, such as the National Council of State Boards of Nursing or the Association of Social Work Boards. Now, many of these associations and state boards across states and territory have very helpful information, but we have yet to find one that has all of the information a program will need to make a determination. I have to say the Association of Social Work Boards comes pretty close. Lastly, you'll want to communicate with the state board or agency if you have any unclear or contradictory information. Sometimes you do find contradictory information. When you've researched the educational requirements you found, then you want to compare it to your program and your curriculum. Not all license types will need an in-depth course comparison, but those that do may need to look at degree level and field, total credits. Maybe you look just at course titles and course descriptions. You may have to go to the assignment level for some. Look at in-program supervised experience, whether or not there's a residency requirement. And in some cases, there's training that the board requires for the first level license that you do not need to have in your program to determine whether or not you meet the requirements, but you might provide a course or an assignment in a course that does help your students in meeting that training requirement for the first level license. For example, in many of the counseling programs, you may have a course on how to identify sexual abuse that a student can use to say they meet outside of program training requirements. Then you use all this information to make your determination if you meet or do not meet. Some questions when you're going through your research that you want to think about and look for specifically in statutes, regulations, or on the board website. Does the program is the program required to have or hold specialized accreditation? Or even if not, does the board accept a program that has that specialized accreditation as meeting educational requirements? Are there specific requirements around supervised experience? Is there a residency requirement? In regard, as I mentioned before, to total number of credits, must all those credits be within the degree program, or can some of them be taken outside of the degree program? For example, in marriage and family therapy licensure, some states require 60 credits, some require 48. So in some cases with the 60 degree states that require 60 credits, they allow the applicant to take 12 credits outside of the degree program. So you want to look for that. Sometimes a course title itself can indicate that the applicant has met required course content. Sometimes they need to submit a syllabi. And as I mentioned just a bit before, is there training required for the initial licensure that may not be required within the program? And who should do this work? You want a lead person. Many of you have already tapped that person. Sometimes it's the compliance director, sometimes it's the general counsel. Sometimes it's up to the program director to lead it for each program, but hopefully you have someone that's more central. You want your curriculum SMEs to be involved once you have the educational requirements in hand. Your provost and registrar may not be on the team full-time, but you'll want to alert them at key points through the process. You'll want to have your systems analyst, IT and website support on the team. And of course, review any materials through your legal team. You'll also want to at least tap your enrollment and admissions leads, let them know what's going on and get information from them, your marketing people, and you may use an external expert like Kris and I. We know, I think one of you I noticed in the Q&A that this is a challenge for universities. So first I'll go through some challenges, just bullet point them so we can leave time for questions. There are differences across each state and territory for each license type, even for those professions that use model acts, even for those license types that have specialized accreditation requirements. You cannot rely on reciprocity or compacts. You must evaluate if the program satisfies educational requirements for initial license in each state or territory. And as Kris somewhat talked about earlier, there's not clear definitions on what not determined, how long that can be used, and what reasonable efforts for SARA means. So those are challenges. It's also a challenge because there are changes to licensure requirements and curriculum. It takes a lot of time and people power to do this work. Not just people power and time, but expertise. It takes some time to learn how to interpret statute and regulations. And then there's the cost involved. We'll go ahead and there are opportunities. Once you know if your program meets educational requirements, it may create new possibilities for enrollments. You'll help your students. Educational programs are the experts in whether or not they meet educational requirements, and you'll reduce risks to the institution. And we have bullet points there. So I'm going to turn it back to Kris for proposed changes, and we're short on time, so I'll just turn it over to you, Kris.
Yeah, and I will say, I'm noticing that we're getting other questions in the Q&A. So I'm assuming we won't have time maybe to get to everyone's question today. We will definitely do a written Q&A so that we can send that out afterwards. And I think MHEC would be able to post that with the other materials from today's presentation. So if we're not able to get to all these, we will make sure that we answer the best of our ability at some point here in the near future. So wanted to share with you what could be happening. So these are proposed changes, and some of you may be familiar with them. They're not brand new. We've known about these for at least 6 months now plus, but we're pointing them out again because we're coming up on some key dates related to these proposed changes. And so this slide here is outlining the Department of Education's proposed changes to the Title IV regulation that is specific to licensure. And the biggest change here, again, this is proposed language through the negotiated rulemaking process last year. The biggest change here would be around an increased level of responsibility. So that first section 32 is requiring institutions to ensure that each program related to licensure meets the educational requirements in that state or territory where it's being offered. So that again would be a new level of responsibility, a new burden put on institutions to ensure. And just really quickly, I know many negotiators during those sessions last year pointed out that this ensure language is problematic for several reasons. I would say the biggest problem with it is that it's very challenging, and if not impossible, for most state and territory licensing boards to get some sort of positive affirmation from them that a particular program meets their requirements for licensure. So licensing is truly an individual applicant by individual applicant review for most instances in virtually all states and territories. So this presents a challenge because as an institution, there's not a mechanism in place today where you could submit your curriculum for review by a state licensing board, have them evaluate it, and then give you something definitive that says, yes, you meet our educational prerequisites for licensure. That's just not something in place today. So this is really problematic language. Hopefully the department has heard that and will continue to hear that and change this so that it's not this ensure. If it ends up being this language, real quickly, did want to point out that there are not very many, but there are some state licensing boards that will evaluate your curriculum as an out-of-state college or university. So just as an example, the Maryland Board of Professional Counselors and Therapists has a process where you can send them your curriculum, and there's a small fee, I think it's less than $100, that they will evaluate your courses and your practicum and internship that are required as part of your program and let you know if it meets their educational requirements or not. So those kind of things, again, are very rare. But there are some examples of boards that are trying to do this work. And so keep that in mind if this moves forward in the way that it's been proposed. Another piece of the department's proposal, would actually remove the not determined option. So you can see their proposed language up on this slide. Essentially, they replaced the current version of the language that includes the not determined or have not made a determination and just removed that altogether. So this would require institutions to state whether it meets or does not meet the educational requirements across the board. Also, the department did not address the individual direct disclosure section in their proposal during negotiated rulemaking last year, which means we're not really sure if or how they would make changes to that. If they're removing no determination from the public, why would they leave it in the direct? So there's probably going to be some other changes that come out from that. And just a quick note here on timing. So again, most of this happened last year during the negotiated rulemaking process. There was no consensus reached on this particular issue, which was a certification issue that the negotiators were considering, which means there was no consensus reached. The Department of Education gets to put forward whatever language they want in their proposal around these regulations. And it is anticipated that by April, so just over a month at some point from now, we will see some proposed language from Department of Education on these particular changes. It's been sitting in the Office of Management and Budget Review for over a few months now, since the end of last year, evaluating the economic impact. But there is information out there that by April there should be something coming out from the department itself. Okay, another thing I wanted to point out here quickly is proposed changes to SARA policy. So we've referenced a few times today in our presentation that there's some considerations, particular to SARA policy that's not in the federal Title IV regulation. And the primary one is this language around all reasonable efforts, right? So institutions should be making all reasonable efforts to determine if their programs meet or do not meet. So there are a couple of proposals in the new SARA policy modification process that have been put forward to actually remove that all reasonable efforts language, since it is in addition to what's required under federal law, and it's not clearly defined what that even means today. There's some proposals out there, including one from MHEC, to remove that language. Another proposal is to make an exception for teacher or educator programs in particular, because of the unique nature of those programs being designed and approved by a single state education office generally. So your Office of Higher Education or teacher licensing, whatever it's called in your state, typically your teacher programs have gone through that curriculum evaluation and approval process by your state for those purposes. And just a quick note here on the SARA policy timeframe. So we are coming up tomorrow, actually. They're holding the first public forum on all of these proposed policy modifications, including the licensure ones we pointed out. So if you're interested, encourage you can sign up on SARA's website to attend the public forums. And then you can see there they have a process in place for opportunities to make amendments, additional public comment, and then potentially final versions or changes of these policies by this fall of 2023. So I know we're hitting the top of the hour, and I'll go through these in a minute, and then maybe we can get to another question or two. But as I mentioned at the start of the presentation, MHEC does have additional resources around licensure available for you all. And the first one is a summary guide. So basically summarizing what Nan and I went through today during the presentation, things you need to do, the steps you need to take in order to understand how your programs meet or don't meet those licensure requirements and then communicate that in the public and direct disclosures. These are available on MEC's website and will be available on the convening page for today's presentation at some point in the near future. MEC also makes available a directory of licensure boards, including the contact information for over 40 different licensed professions and occupations. Again, this will be available, a link to this will be available on the convening page for this presentation. So this is a great tool if you're looking for, contact information and want to try to find that in one source instead of Googling and finding licensing boards on your own or going through individual professional associations. And finally, we wanted to point out that, Nan and I we work with institutions on this stuff every day. So if you're feeling overwhelmed by all of the work that goes into understanding how your programs meet requirements and then communicating that, a tool you may want to consider is our new online database of educational requirements. It's called the Bookmark, and we do have information for over 50 different license types covering all US states and territories. We offer different membership levels, hopefully to make it accessible to any institution who wants to become a member, and those start at $5,000 a year. You can find information on our website, including a link to register to attend an upcoming information session and demonstration of the Bookmark. All right, so we have maybe a minute or two left if we wanted to run through another question or two. And then, as I said, we will answer other questions in writing and get those out after the presentation. Nan or Sarah, do you have any questions that popped up that you think would be a good one to close on here?
I think one of the participants asked about, doesn't NC SARA have a list of professional licensure? And yes, they do. They're specifically focused in about 4 or 5 areas. One of them is counseling, psychology, nursing, teacher education, and social work. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But you can find that on their website under the professional licensure tab at the top. That was a good quiz. I'm glad I could remember them.
Impressive.
Thanks.
And we do have a link to the SARA resources available on our last slide here. So if you're looking for that page, you can find a link there on how to get to those licensure resources available through NC SARA.
Well, Kris, we can try a few. Direct disclosures do not need to be made if a program meets requirements, only if they do not meet requirements or have not made that determination, correct?
That is correct.
And some of these have to do with requirements that are outside of a program, such as post-grad experience. So a program does not have to meet, for that example, post-grad experience in order to say it meets educational requirements, as long as it meets the ones that are in program.
Also correct. Yep.
You said using a link is not sufficient. Do you also need to include the name and address?
So guessing that means for providing contact information for the board, if it's a not determined state under that SARA policy. So again, it says contact information, not explicitly defined. If you're providing a link directly to the homepage of the board or agency, and there's clearly, an email address and a phone number available there, I think that seems reasonable. But obviously more helpful if you can provide a direct email and phone number right on your disclosure as well. So some of this is all a judgment call, right? Because we don't have prescriptive templates or clear definitions on some of this stuff.
I think that's probably it for us, but we'll do a run through these questions and provide somewhat of a FAQ or post meeting clarification for ones we haven't gotten to, or we feel we could contribute more information. Does that sound good to you, Kris?
That works for me. Yeah, great.
And Sarah?
Absolutely. And thank you, Nan and Kris, for taking the time out on a Tuesday afternoon to be with us today. And for those of you still with us, yes, these slides will be available per the recording that will be hosted on the, excuse me, on the MHEC website. So please take a look for those as well. And eventually we'll get those FAQs up for you to take a look at and use as a resource too.
Great.
All right.
Thanks, everyone.
Wonderful.
Have a good
Thank you,
day.
everybody. Bye-bye.